Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for more Southwest Lost Tales. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. For future videos, hit the notification bell. Relax and enjoy. Welcome to our Southwest Desert channel, where we delve into the lives of extraordinary individuals who have left an indelible mark on American Southwest history. Today, we're exploring the legendary life of Ben Lilly, often referred to as the last of the mountain men. Imagine a man so in tune with nature that he could read the wilderness like a book, a hunter so skilled that even President Theodore Roosevelt sang his praises. This was Benjamin Vernon Lilly, born on the last day of 1856 in Wilcox County, Alabama. If Ben Lilly had been born just a century earlier, his name might have been as widely recognized as Kit Carson, Bill Williams, or Jim Bridger. Instead, he became a living legend in the Blue River country of Arizona and New Mexico, leaving behind a legacy that still resonates with outdoorsmen and history buffs alike. From an early age, hunting wasn't just a pastime for Ben Lilly. It was a calling. He firmly believed that he was appointed by God to rid the lands of what he called varmints. This divine mission, as he saw it, led him to dedicate his life to hunting predators, particularly mountain lions and bears. Lilly's reputation as a hunter was unparalleled. Some even claim he was the greatest hunter America ever produced. His skills were so renowned that in 1907, 5 years before he made the Southwest his home, he was chosen to guide none other than President Theodore Roosevelt on a hunting expedition in Louisiana. Roosevelt was so impressed by Lilly's abilities that he wrote about the experience, further cementing Lilly's reputation. In 1912, at the age of 56, Ben Lilly arrived in Arizona. He set up his base at Tommy Cosper's ranch on Blue River, just below an impressive natural feature known as the Box, a 700-foot deep gash carved by the Blue River through the Mogollon Rim. Little did Lilly know that the next 15 years would become what he later described as the happiest and most productive of his life. The Blue River country and the foothills of New Mexico's Mogollon Mountains became Lilly's hunting grounds. It was here that he truly made his mark, becoming a figure of near mythical proportions among the local population. Those who knew Ben Lilly always referred to him as Mr. Lilly. This wasn't just a sign of respect for his age, but a reflection of the man's character. Despite his rough exterior and chosen lifestyle, there was something about Lilly that commanded respect. Mark Musgrave, one of the few who knew Lilly well, described him as a man of distinction. Standing just under 6 feet tall, Lilly was stocky and strong, with very blue, deep-set eyes that held a steady gaze. His full, wavy beard and rosy cheeks set against a rich golden tan gave him a distinguished appearance that belied his rugged profession. Lilly was a man of principles. He never smoked, never swore, and never drank. His constant companion was the Bible, which he read for hours while in camp and often carried with him on the trail. He would quote from it frequently, lending his speech a quaint, folksy quality that added to his unique character. Ben Lilly's life as a hunter was nothing short of extraordinary. Over a 15-year period, he claimed to have bagged an astounding 650 mountain lions and bears. This feat is even more impressive when you consider that by the time Lilly arrived in the Southwest, much of the once abundant game had already been thinned out by other hunters. What set Lilly apart was his incredible stamina and determination. He could go for days with nothing more than a bit of cornmeal while on a fresh trail. His body was described as a set of steel-trap springs, tough, resilient, and seemingly immune to fatigue. Lilly would trail an animal to the very end, often literally wearing out his prey before giving up. His knowledge of his quarry was unparalleled. After being on a lion's trail for just a short time, Lilly could determine its sex, approximate age, whether it was in its usual territory or new to the area, and even if it was hunting or just wandering. If it was a female, he could tell if she was carrying kittens and roughly when they were due. He gleaned all this information from minute examinations of tracks, stray hairs caught on bushes, the animals' beds, and marks left on trees. Ben Lilly's life wasn't without its challenges. In middle age, he became profoundly deaf, so much so that he couldn't hear his own hounds barking when they had treed their quarry. For most hunters, this would have spelled the end of their career. But Lilly was no ordinary man. To overcome his deafness, he devised an ingenious solution. He tied a lead hound to his belt, allowing the dog to guide him to the rest of the pack when they had cornered or treed their prey. Lilly's hounds were exceptionally well trained, staying with the game until he arrived, no matter how long it took, be it 5 hours or 5 days. This method wasn't without its dangers. Once, while following his lead hound, Lilly was pulled over a cliff by the excited animal. He found himself at the bottom of a canyon with a broken leg. Displaying the stoicism and self-reliance that defined his character, Lilly calmly set his own leg, using a fallen tree limb as a splint and strips torn from his shirt to bind it in place. He then crawled on all fours back to his camp, where he remained alone for several days until his leg had set enough to allow him to ride a burro to seek better medical attention. One of the most intriguing aspects of Ben Lilly's character was his strict adherence to observing the Sabbath. Despite his passion for hunting, Lilly never hunted on Sundays. Even if he was close to catching a lion on Saturday night, he would call off his dogs until Monday morning. The only exception to this rule was if he lost track of the days and inadvertently hunted on a Sunday. In such cases, when he realized his mistake, he would take the next day off, asking for the Lord's forgiveness through prayer and meditation. Sundays were not just for devotion, but also for personal hygiene. Regardless of the weather, Lilly would use this day to wash both his clothes and himself. In the depths of winter, he would break the ice on a nearby stream or pool and plunge in for a bath. Sometimes he would even take snow baths, sitting naked in a snowbank and rubbing himself clean with handfuls of snow. This hardiness extended to his sleeping habits as well. Lilly slept outdoors all year round, directly on the ground. He claimed that houses smelled rancid and that he'd catch a cold if he slept indoors. As with many frontier figures, the stories about Ben Lilly grew with each telling. Every old-timer in the Southwest seemed to have at least one Lilly anecdote. While it's difficult to verify many of these tales now, it was generally believed that anything Lilly wrote down was as close to the truth as he could make it. However, in a crowd, he was known to draw the long bow pretty far, embellishing his stories for effect. One story that speaks to Lilly's vitality, even in his later years, comes from Mark Musgrave. He recounts meeting Lilly at one of his camps when the hunter was already past 70 years old. To demonstrate how good he felt, Lilly ran to the top of a high hill 100 yards away and back again, barely breaking a sweat. Ben Lilly's impact on the Southwest was significant. He was employed several times by the U.S. Biological Survey as a predatory animal hunter, but he mostly worked independently, collecting bounties from counties and states. There are conflicting reports about his financial status at the end of his life. Some claim that despite the bank failures of the 1930s, he still had nearly $15,000 in savings when he died. Others dispute this, arguing that he was nearly penniless in his final days. What is known is that towards the end of his life, Lilly's mind began to wander and he couldn't remember in which banks his funds were kept. Lilly's legacy extends beyond his hunting exploits. He was known for making his own knives, often forging blades from discarded materials like horseshoers' rasps, worn-out saw blades, old auto springs, and hay rake teeth. His knives were distinctive, featuring a backward sweep he called the Lilly hook, designed based on his years of close-quarters use. He also had a unique way of signing checks, often written on whatever material was at hand: bark, paper bag scraps, or newspaper margins. His signature was unmistakable: a drawing of a honeybee, followed by the letter V, and a drawing of a lily, BV lily. Despite their unconventional appearance, these checks were always honored. Ben Lilly passed away on December 17, 1936, just 2 weeks shy of his 80th birthday. He spent his final days in Buckhorn, New Mexico, among the pine-covered mountains and picturesque canyons he had grown to love so deeply. While he had hoped to meet death beneath a dusky cedar or along a sun-flecked trail, his many friends, thoughtful of his comfort, ensured he was cared for. In the end, Ben Lilly, the last of the mountain men, died in bed at the Grant County farm. Today, in the foothills of New Mexico's Mogollon Mountains, a monument stands in memory of Ben Lilly. But perhaps his greatest monument lies in the stories and memories of those who knew him, and in the wild lands he roamed and protected. His life serves as a testament to a bygone era, a time when the American frontier was still wild, and men like Ben Lilly could carve out a legend with nothing more than their wits, their courage, and their unwavering connection to the natural world. As we reflect on the life of Ben Lilly, we're reminded of the complex tapestry of American history. Lilly was a product of his time, a man driven by a sense of divine purpose to hunt predators, yet also a steward of the wilderness he called home. His story challenges us to consider the changing relationship between humans and nature, the evolution of the American frontier, and the enduring allure of individuals who live life on their own terms. Ben Lilly may have been the last of the mountain men, continues to inspire adventurers and conservationists alike. As we face new frontiers and challenges in our modern world, perhaps we can draw inspiration from the life of Ben Lilly, his resilience, his self-reliance, and his profound connection to the wild places of this earth. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Ben Lilly, the last mountain man. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of adventure alive. Welcome to the Southwest Desert Channel, where we delve into the fascinating stories of the American Southwest. Today, we're exploring the life of Louie Simons, a remarkable figure who lived during the twilight of the fur-trapping era and well into the settlement of the American frontier. His story is one of adventure, love, tragedy, and the changing face of the American West. Our tale begins in 1817 when Luther W. Simons, better known as Louie, was born somewhere in Kentucky. Like many young men of his time, Louie was drawn to the promise of adventure and fortune in the West. At the tender age of 14, he joined the Old Fur Brigade, embarking on a life that would take him far from his Kentucky roots. In 1831, the same year he joined the brigade, young Louie accompanied a group of seasoned trappers into the Uinta Basin. It was here that he first encountered Antoine Robidoux, a prominent fur trader who would later establish a trading post in the area. This early expedition marked the beginning of Louie's long association with the Uinta region, a place that would play a significant role in his later years. For the next decade and a half, Louie honed his skills as a trapper and mountain man. He learned to navigate the rugged terrain of the Rocky Mountains, to read the signs of nature, and to survive in the harsh wilderness. By 1846, when he was encountered in Santa Fe and Taos by Louis H. Garrard, author of Watuya and the Taos Trail, Louie had become known as one of the best trappers in the Rocky Mountains. Garrard's account paints a vivid picture of Louie Simons. He describes him as a wild, brave, and carefree mountain man, full of tall tales and never hesitant to recount his own exploits. Like many of his fellow trappers, Louie was illiterate, but what he lacked in formal education, he made up for in practical skills and outdoor knowledge. Our story takes an interesting turn in 1852, when Louie, now 35 years old, married Adeline Carson in Taos. Adeline was no ordinary bride. She was the daughter of the legendary Kit Carson, perhaps the most famous of all the mountain men. Adeline's own story is worth noting. She was born around 1837 to Kit Carson and his Arapaho wife, Wa Naib, also known as Singing Grass. Tragically, Singing Grass died when Adeline was only about 2 years old. Unable to care for an infant while pursuing his trapping career, Kit initially left Adeline with her mother's relatives. In 1842, when Adeline was about 5 years old, Kit Carson took her back to his old home in Howard County, Missouri. There, he left her in the care of his sister, Elizabeth, making provisions for her care and education. Adeline remained in Missouri until she was 13, receiving a formal education that was rare for a girl of her background in those times. In 1851, Kit Carson returned to Missouri to bring his daughter back to Santa Fe. The journey was not without peril. Near the Cimarron, their party was attacked by Cheyenne, and it was only Kit's quick thinking that saved them from massacre. Back in Santa Fe, Adeline lived with her father and his new Spanish wife, Josefa. However, this arrangement may not have been ideal. Josefa, herself only 22 years old, might not have been entirely comfortable with her 14-year-old stepdaughter, particularly given Adeline's mixed heritage. It was in this context that Adeline, at just 14 years old, married the 35-year-old Louie Simons in 1852. While such an age difference might shock us today, it wasn't uncommon in those times. Kit Carson himself had married Josefa when she was 14, and he likely saw marriage as a way to ensure his daughter's future. Immediately after their marriage, Louie and Adeline left for California. The timing of their move is significant. The California gold rush was in full swing, having begun in 1848. Like many others, Louie decided to try his luck in the Golden State. However, life in Gold Rush, California proved challenging for the couple. Louie, accustomed to the solitary life of a trapper, found himself out of place in the frenetic atmosphere of California's booming towns. At 36, the bright lights and constant excitement held little appeal for him. Adeline, on the other hand, seems to have embraced her new surroundings. At 15, she was at an age where the excitement and opportunities of California were irresistible. The stark difference in their attitudes towards their new life created a rift between the couple. As one might expect in such a situation, tragedy struck. Adeline met a man more aligned with her youthful energy and ran away with him. In the chaos of the gold rush, with miners constantly moving from one strike to another, it might have seemed impossible to track down two individuals. But Louie Simons was no ordinary man. He had spent years tracking game and evading hostile Native Americans. With the patience and skill of an experienced mountain man, he followed their trail persistently, year after year. In 1859, Louie finally caught up with Adeline and her new companion in Mono diggings. By this time, Adeline was known as Prairie Flower, Kit Carson's daughter. Without revealing his presence, Louie carefully observed the situation, biding his time. When he deemed the moment right, Louie took action. With the precision of a seasoned hunter, he used his Kentucky rifle to eliminate Adeline's companion. The man was buried the next day, but no one ever knew who had killed him. This grim act of vengeance marked a turning point in Louie's life. With this matter settled, he was ready to leave California behind and return to the mountains he knew so well. Louie's decision to return to the mountains was not a simple one. He couldn't return to Taos, where Kit Carson might ask uncomfortable questions about Adeline. Many of his old trapper friends had settled in various parts of the West, but Louie wasn't looking for company. After careful consideration, he decided to return to the Uinta Mountains, where he had first come as a young boy with the Fur Brigade. It was one of the wildest, most isolated spots in the West, far from the usual routes of travel. Robidoux trading post had been burned down, and there were no white settlers in the Uinta Basin at that time. So, in the fall of 1859, Louie Simons retreated to Brown's Hole in the Uinta Mountains. This area was used by Native Americans and a handful of mixed-race individuals left behind by the fur trade as a winter camp. Louie arrived with minimal possessions: a horse, a pair of greyhounds, a few traps, and his trusty Kentucky rifle. His years as a mountain man had taught him how to live off the land, and that was exactly what he intended to do. For the next 20 years, Louie Simons lived in the mountains, adopting a lifestyle more akin to that of a Native American than a white settler. His old companions from the trapping days assumed he had died. He lived in isolation, relying on his hunting and trapping skills to survive. This solitary existence came to an end in the spring of 1879, when Louie emerged from the mountains to discover that the world had changed around him. White settlers had moved into the Uinta Basin, arriving in covered wagons to farm the flat valley along the Uinta River. A troop of soldiers had established an encampment at Fort Duchesne, tasked with protecting the settlers from Ute raids. Despite these changes, Louie was not eager to rejoin society. He had lived alone for so long that he had no desire to adjust to the new conditions. Instead, he continued to live in a crude cabin in the mountains, subsisting primarily on wild game. He would trap a little and trade his pelts at Fort Bridger for essentials like gunpowder, lead, and occasionally coffee and sugar. As the years passed, Louie Simons became a familiar figure in the Uinta Basin. He was now known to all as Uncle Louie. He would sometimes make a winter camp near a ranch, and on his infrequent trips through the valley, he was always welcomed by the settlers. Uncle Louie was selective about the parts of his past he shared. Only trusted friends like Pete Dillman and Finn Britt ever learned the full story of why he lived alone in the mountains. To most, he was simply a colorful character from the early days of the West. As he grew older, Uncle Louie was afflicted with palsy, which made his hands shake uncontrollably. Despite this, he managed to continue hunting, using what Bill Williams described as a double wobble to steady his rifle. In the frontier town of Vernal, he became known for his unique way of drinking whiskey. He would have to sip it from a glass sitting on the bar because his hands were too unsteady to lift the glass to his lips. The winter of 1893 marked the beginning of the end for Uncle Louie. He was living in a small log shack in a canyon above the White Rocks Ute Indian Agency. He would occasionally ride down to the trading post for supplies or to share his stories. But when a heavy snow fell, he wasn't seen for several weeks. In the spring, soldiers searching for a strayed horse stumbled upon Uncle Louie's cabin. They found the old man helpless in his bed, nearly starved to death and suffering from frostbite. They took him to the military hospital at Fort Duchesne, where he remained for several weeks. However, the long illness had taken its toll on Uncle Louie's mind. In March 1894, he was sent to the Utah State Mental Hospital in Provo. George Searle, then sheriff of Uinta County, was given the task of transporting the old mountain man. Louie was admitted to the hospital on March 8, 1894, diagnosed with senile dementia. But Uncle Louie wasn't quite done yet. On October 1, 1894, he was discharged from the hospital, declared cured. Unfortunately, there's no record of where he went after his release or when he ultimately passed away. Old-timers in the Uinta Basin insist that he never returned to his old haunts. Before leaving for the hospital, Uncle Louie had given Sheriff Searle a bundle of papers and letters for safekeeping. He never returned to claim them, and although Searle kept them for many years, they were eventually lost. One can only wonder what stories those papers might have told. Perhaps they contained letters from Adeline Carson, the Prairie Flower. As for Adeline, her story came to an end long before Uncle Louie's. She died in 1860, and was buried on the shore of Mono Lake. Her friends had planned to erect a monument over her grave, but it was never done, and the exact location of her final resting place has been lost to time. Louie Simons' life spanned an era of immense change in the American West. He began his Western adventures when the fur trade was still booming, lived through the gold rush, and survived to see the settlement of areas that were wilderness in his youth. His story, pieced together from the memories of those who knew him and other historical sources, gives us a glimpse into a bygone era. It's a tale of adventure, love, tragedy, and survival, a true embodiment of the spirit of the Old West. To the settlers of the Uinta Basin in the late 19th century, Uncle Louie was a living link to the early days of westward expansion. His tales of Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, and the fur-trapping days must have seemed like ancient history to them. As we conclude this tale, it's worth reflecting on the extraordinary life of Louie Simons. From a young Kentucky boy joining the Fur Brigade, to Kit Carson's son-in-law, to a solitary mountain dweller, his journey tells us much about the changing face of the American West. It reminds us that history is not just about grand events and famous figures, but also about the lives of individuals who, in their own way, shaped and were shaped by the times in which they lived. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating stories of our past. In the early 1800s, as America pushed westward, a remarkable cast of characters carved out new paths across the continent. But few left a legacy as profound and as overlooked as Ewing Young. This is the story of a man who helped shape the American Southwest, one dangerous expedition at a time. The year was 1822, and a young man of 28 stood at the edge of what would become known as the Santa Fe Trail. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, Ewing Young cut an impressive figure among the rough-and-ready frontiersmen of his day. Though ordinarily quiet, those who knew him spoke of a man with a hot temper and a fearless streak that would serve him well in the dangerous territories ahead. His contemporaries would come to know him as a shrewd trader, sometimes described as devious, but always recognized for his remarkable ability to lead men through the most challenging circumstances. Young had arrived with William Becknell's pioneering second expedition, part of the first wagon train to traverse the Santa Fe Trail. But this was just the beginning of a journey that would see him master multiple frontier professions: trapping, trading, farming, milling, and droving. Young wasn't content to simply survive on the frontier. He was determined to prosper. Picture Taos in the 1820s, an adobe pueblo nestled on a broad plain with the majestic Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising to the east and the Rio Grande Canyon cutting through the landscape to the west. This Mexican frontier outpost would become Young's base of operations, a strategic hub for his ambitious plans. The town's position made it ideal, a gateway to the southern Rockies and their beaver-rich streams, with easy access to the legendary trapping grounds of North and South Parks. Taos wasn't just any frontier town. It was the beating heart of the fur trade in the Southwest. While other trappers gathered at annual rendezvous points in the northern territories, Taos operated year-round as an exchange center for furs and supplies. The local brew, known as Taos Lightning, fueled many a deal and tale around evening fires. By 1825, the region was opening up new opportunities for enterprising men like Young, particularly in the virtually untapped Gila River drainage system to the south. The Gila River territory was a land of stark contrasts and hidden riches. In the northern reaches, the White Mountains fed countless streams that reminded trappers of their Rocky Mountain haunts. The Mogollon Rim's tributaries created a network of waterways that promised rich beaver harvests. The political and cultural landscape was equally complex. Mexican authority in the region was more theoretical than practical. Government officials rarely ventured into these remote territories, but their 1824 law banning American trappers was very real, as was their power to confiscate furs and equipment from those they caught. The indigenous presence was even more significant. This was Navajo territory, dominated by various Apache bands who viewed outsiders with deep suspicion and often deadly intent. For most men, these challenges would have been deterrents. For Young, they were opportunities. The very distance from Mexican authorities that made the region dangerous also made it perfect for those willing to operate beyond official oversight. Smuggling routes could be established and profits could be made if you were clever enough to survive. In 1826, Young made his first bold move into the Gila River country, partnering with William Wolfskill to lead an 18-man expedition. The timing was crucial. Several other parties were also pushing into the region. The French company B. Pratt and Company had dispatched multiple groups. Sylvester Pratt led one contingent, while St. Vrain and Williams commanded 20 men, and Miguel Robideau directed a force of 30 trappers. John Rowland's independent group of 18 men added to the competition for the rich beaver grounds. Young's party included some of the most colorful characters in Western history. Milton Sublette, just 25 years old and already known as the Thunderbolt of the Rocky Mountains, brought his remarkable skills as a trapper and fighter. Thomas L. Smith, who had been trapping since 1820, would later earn the nickname Peg Leg after a harrowing adventure, but that's a tale for another episode. The success of this first expedition emboldened Young to launch an even more ambitious venture in 1827. Leading a larger party of 30 men, he departed from the copper mines in January. What followed was an epic tale of survival, courage, and determination. The expedition faced repeated battles with Apache warriors, testing Young's leadership abilities to their limits. In one of the most dramatic episodes, his party discovered and rescued survivors from Robideau's ill-fated expedition, an event that would later be chronicled in James Ohio Patty's famous journal. The party pushed their exploration to new limits, venturing down the lower Colorado River, through the Mojave Valley, and into the Virgin River region. But success attracted attention, and Mexican authorities eventually caught up with them. The expedition ended with their arrest and the confiscation of their furs, though Milton Sublette managed to escape with a portion of their hard-won pelts. This setback led Young to completely reimagine his approach to the fur trade. By 1829, he had developed a bold new strategy. Instead of dealing with the officials in Santa Fe, he would take his furs directly to the California coast, where sea captains paid premium prices for pelts. This wasn't just about avoiding Mexican authorities. It was about opening up entirely new trading opportunities in the San Joaquin Valley. His 1829 to 1831 California expedition marked the peak of his trapping career. Among the 40 men who set out with him was a 19-year-old Kit Carson, who would later become one of the most famous frontiersmen in American history. Young's cunning was on full display as he initially led the party north to throw off any Mexican officials watching their departure, only to turn southwest toward Zuni Pueblo once they were out of sight. The route took them through some of the most challenging territories in the Southwest. They trapped along the Salt River and Verde River, establishing new patterns of exploration that others would follow. Young's leadership abilities were tested repeatedly as they faced encounters with Mexican authorities, various Indian tribes, and even Hudson's Bay Company trappers under Peter Skeen Ogden in the San Joaquin Valley. By 1831, Young had established himself as one of the most successful trappers in the Southwest. He formed a partnership with David Jackson and David Waldo that represented a new phase in the fur trade. Jackson focused on horse and mule acquisition, while Young continued his trapping operations. Their partnership required sophisticated coordination, with Jackson leading advance parties of 10 men while Young commanded larger groups of up to 36 trappers. Their routes through the copper mines and the Presidio of Tucson would later become important thoroughfares for Western expansion. But the golden age of trapping was coming to an end. By 1834, Young himself admitted that catches were poor. Competition with the Hudson's Bay Company was fierce, beaver populations were declining, and his partnership with Jackson had dissolved. Yet Young's influence extended far beyond the fur trade. His expeditions helped establish and refine important trade routes, including sections of what would become the Old Spanish Trail. The Wolfskill Uint expedition, building on Young's earlier routes, would help create the vital Santa Fe-Los Angeles connection. This commercial artery wound through the Uinta Basin, crossed the Wasatch Range, and followed the Sevier River, becoming a crucial thoroughfare for livestock and trade goods for the next 2 decades. In Taos, Young's presence was part of a larger transformation of the frontier. The trapping community was evolving, with increased Mexican participation and American trappers becoming naturalized citizens. These men often converted to Catholicism and married into local families, creating a unique cultural bridge between American and Mexican societies. The legacy of Young and the Taos trappers extended well beyond their immediate era. They maintained crucial connections to newer trading posts like Bent's Fort, established in 1833. Their knowledge of geography, water sources, and native populations proved invaluable to later settlers. The commercial networks they established would evolve into the foundation of the region's economy. Young's personal evolution from trapper to settler reflected the changing nature of the frontier. His ability to adapt, diversifying his business interests and adjusting to California life, demonstrated the flexibility required to succeed in the West. His influence on frontier development went far beyond his personal achievements, as he helped train future leaders like Kit Carson and established patterns of trade that would persist for generations. Young's legacy lives on in the maps he helped create, the routes he established, and the communities he influenced. His life shows us how the American West was truly won, not just through grand policies and military campaigns, but through the daily courage, determination, and adaptability of individuals willing to risk everything for a chance at success. This has been the story of Ewing Young, a pioneer whose legacy lives on in the trails we travel, the communities we build, and the spirit of adventure that continues to define the American West. Picture yourself in the American West of the 1820s. The Rocky Mountains loom before you, their peaks shrouded in mystery. Rivers teeming with beaver wind through valleys unexplored by any European. And somewhere in those mountains, a remarkable French-Canadian named Etienne Provost is about to make history. Welcome to Southwest Desert. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're diving into the extraordinary life of a man nicknamed L'Homme des Montagnes, the man of the mountains. A figure whose legacy lives on in the landscape itself, yet whose story has largely faded into the mists of time. The year is 1785, and in the bustling port city of Quebec, a child is born who would one day become one of the most influential mountain men of the American West. Etienne Provost entered a world on the cusp of change, as the young United States was just beginning to look westward with hungry eyes. But before we follow Provost into those mountains, let's fast forward a few decades to paint you a picture of our protagonist in his prime. The 1830s descriptions of Provost are nothing short of colorful. Picture, if you will, a man with, and I quote, a corpus as round as a porpoise. This burly mountain man, with his ruddy face and robust figure, was often compared to a French merchantman's mate, or even Bacchus himself, the ancient god of wine and revelry. But don't let that jovial description fool you. Beneath that rotund exterior beat the heart of one of the most capable and daring explorers of his age. As Bartholomew Berthold would later describe him, Provost was the soul of the hunters of the mountains. The story of Provost's journey into legend begins in 1815, when he joined the Château de Moon Company on his first mountain expedition. Imagine, if you will, a group of nearly 50 engagés, hired hands, pushing into territory that no American had ever mapped. Their base camp was established at the mouth of the Huerfano River, where it meets the Arkansas. But it was what lay beyond that would cement Provost's place in history. This expedition would achieve something remarkable. They became the first known Americans to explore what we now call South Park, Colorado. If you're picturing the cartoon, think again. This high-altitude valley, known to the French as Bayou Salado, was a pristine wilderness that would have taken their breath away, quite literally, given the altitude. They pushed on to explore North Park, the source of the North Platte River, though the rugged ranges of the Continental Divide proved too formidable to reach Middle Park. But here's where our story takes a dark turn. You see, all this exploration was happening in Spanish territory, and the Spanish authorities were, shall we say, less than thrilled about these American interlopers. The consequences were severe. The Château de Moon group found themselves stripped of property valued at over $30,000, an enormous sum for the time. Worse still, they spent 48 grueling days in what were described as the dungeons of Santa Fe. The Spanish officials were sending a clear message. American explorers were not welcome. But history, as it often does, had other plans. In 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain, and suddenly the game changed entirely. The new Mexican citizens welcomed American traders with open arms, though there was still a catch. Trapping regulations remained strict. This is where Provost showed his true genius. He adapted to the new reality, setting up a partnership with François Leclerc in Taos in 1822. By 1824, his operations had grown impressively. Picture a camp of 80 men, their base established near the White River mouth, all working under the leadership of our rotund hero. But it's 1824 that brings us to perhaps the most harrowing chapter in Provost's story. Leading a party of 10 men westward over the Wasatch Range, they encountered a group of Shoshone. What seemed at first to be a peaceful meeting, they were invited to smoke the peace pipe, turned into a clever trap. The Shoshone asked them to remove all metal objects for the ceremony, a request that would prove fatal for most of the party. What followed was an ambush that left 8 men dead. Only Provost and 1 other managed to escape with their lives. Yet even this near-death experience couldn't keep Provost from making history. During this ill-fated expedition, he may have become the first white man to see the Great Salt Lake, a legacy that lives on today in the names of Provo City and the Provo River in Utah. But perhaps the most fascinating chapter in Provost's story comes in 1825, when he found himself at the center of an international incident that would help shape the American West. It's May 23, 1825, and Provost's diverse company, a fascinating mix of French Canadians, Spaniards, Iroquois deserters, and even Russians, comes face to face with the Hudson's Bay Company, led by Peter Skene Ogden. The British company had been following a scorched earth policy, trying to create a beaver-free buffer zone to discourage American expansion. Enter Johnson Gardner, who accused the British of trespassing and then made them an offer they couldn't refuse: $3.50 per pound for beaver pelts, significantly more than they were getting from the Hudson's Bay Company. He also promised supplies at lower prices. The result? 23 men deserted the British company on the spot, forcing them to retreat. This confrontation would have lasting implications for the American presence in the West. But perhaps Provost's most significant contribution to Western history came later that same year, when he participated in the first ever General Rendezvous organized by William Ashley. Imagine the scene at Henry's Fork. 120 people gathered for a one-day trading extravaganza that would change the fur trade forever. On July 1st, 1825, Provost sold 153 pounds of beaver at $2.50 per pound. The total collection that day was staggering: 8,829 pounds of beaver, worth between $40,000 and $50,000 in St. Louis. But more than the money, this rendezvous established a new way of doing business in the mountains. It created a system of year-round mountain trapping supported by annual supply caravans, shifting the profit center from the trappers to the supplier buyers. The needs of these mountain men were diverse, from basic supplies like traps, powder, and lead, to consumables like coffee, sugar, and tobacco, to trade goods for Native Americans including ribbons, bells, and beads. This system would define the fur trade for decades to come. Provost would continue in the fur trade for another 2 decades, eventually shifting his base from Taos to the Missouri River. When he died, approximately 25 years after that first historic rendezvous, his funeral was held in the St. Louis Cathedral, a fitting tribute to a man who had helped shape the American West. As we look back on Provost's life, what emerges is a portrait of a man who was both larger than life and deeply human, a man whose physical appearance might have invited jokes, but whose capabilities commanded respect, a survivor who faced death in the mountains and emerged to help forge a new chapter in American history. His legacy lives on not just in the places that bear his name, Provo City and the Provo River, but in the very shape of the American West. He was one of those remarkable individuals who didn't just witness history, but helped write it, one mountain pass, one trading post, one beaver pelt at a time. The next time you find yourself in Utah, looking out over the Great Salt Lake or standing on the banks of the Provo River, spare a thought for that rotund French-Canadian who first gazed upon these landscapes 2 centuries ago. L'homme des montagnes, the man of the mountains, Etienne Provost. This has been Southwest Desert. Until next time, remember that history isn't just about the famous names in textbooks. Sometimes it's about the forgotten figures who blazed the trails that others would follow. I hope you enjoyed these Southwest adventures. If you would like to help support my channel and time, hit the super thanks heart icon on the bottom of the video and contribute. This is very helpful. Also check out my large catalog of videos and playlists. Happy trails!